You know that feeling when you scroll through a dozen spotting scopes, see the glossy photos, read the hype about field-ready optics, and then wonder whether you'll actually get a clear image of a bird's feather pattern without having to wrestle a giant tube through the woods? I've been there, and I've also watched a few friends bring home a scope that looked perfect on paper but turned out to be a handful to carry, fog up at the first hint of humidity, or just not give the crisp detail they expected once they actually set it up on a hilltop. That hesitation is why I wanted to break down the ZEISS Dialyt 1845 by 65 field spotter before anyone clicks add to cart. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the Dialyt is built around ZEISS's reputation for optical coatings, and that really shows up when you're trying to pick out a distant deer silhouette against a hazy horizon. The T** coating is advertised to boost contrast, and in practice it does make the green-brown tones of foliage pop while keeping the sky a clean, uniform blue. That matters when you're birding early in the morning and the light is thin, your eye can focus on the subject without fighting a wash of glare. The thing that catches most people's attention is the size. ZEISS went for a monoblock construction that eliminates a lot of the joints you see on larger, multi-piece scopes. The result is a tube that's roughly the length of a large water bottle and weighs just under 2 pounds. For a 65mm aperture, that's surprisingly light. I took it on a weekend hike up to a known hawk migration ridge, packed it in a small backpack alongside a 10-liter water bottle, and the whole thing fit without bulging the pack. When you stop for a break, pulling the scope out feels almost effortless compared to lugging a 4-kilogram traditional spotting scope that needs a tripod every few minutes. Comfort during operation is another point that often gets lost in spec sheets. The eyepiece on the Dialyt has a relatively long eye relief, which means you don't have to press your eye hard against the tube to get the full field of view. That's a relief when you're wearing glasses or when you have to keep the scope steady for a few seconds while the wind dies down. The focus knob turns smoothly, and the zoom range 18 to 45 covers most field situations, from scanning a broad meadow at low magnification to zeroing in on a distant raptor at the upper end. One of the hidden trade-offs in any compact design is the potential for internal condensation, especially when you move from a warm car to a cool forest. ZEISS tackled that by sealing the alloy housing with nitrogen. In real-world testing, I moved the scope from a heated garage straight into a misty valley at dawn, and the optics stayed clear. No droplets formed inside the lenses, so you didn't have to wipe the view with a cloth and risk scratching the coating. That nitrogen fill is a subtle but valuable feature for anyone who spends time in variable weather. Now, let's talk about who actually benefits from this setup. If you're an avid birdwatcher who likes to chase waterfowl across wetlands, a lightweight spotter that you can handhold for short bursts is ideal. The quick zoom lets you locate a flock at 18, then jump to 30 or 45 as a bird takes off. The field of view at the low end is wide enough to track moving subjects without constant refocusing. The robust construction also means you can toss it into a backpack without worrying about delicate alignment. For hunters who need a portable scope for occasional scouting trips, especially when the weight of a full-size spotting scope would slow you down, this is a solid compromise between power and portability. Conversely, if you're a serious wildlife photographer who relies on pinpoint precision at the maximum 45 for every shot, you might feel the limits. The 65mm objective gathers less light than the 80mm or larger models you see on high-end rigs, which can translate into a dimmer image in low-light conditions, like dusk or heavily forested areas. I tried to capture a nighttime owl using the Dialyt at 45, and while the image remained sharp, the brightness was noticeably lower than what you'd get from a larger aperture. That's not a deal-breaker for most birders, but if you need every photon for critical photography, you may want to consider stepping up to a bigger scope. Another nuance is the reliance on handheld stability. The design is meant to be used without a tripod, and the built-in grip does a decent job, but at the top of the zoom range you'll feel the shake if you don't have a steady stance. The scope's weight helps reduce fatigue, but for extended observation at 45 you might still find a small, lightweight tripod or a monopod beneficial. It's not a flaw, it's just a reality of physics that any compact 45 instrument will have. Practical strengths that stand out after a few.